the great majority of people having a near-death experience don't make a choice about whether to stay in that beautiful unearthly realm or not. They're sent back basically involuntarily to their physical body. But there is a small percentage that have a fascinating discussion, typically with other beings around them, about a choice they have, a choice to stay in that beautiful unearthly realm or return to their earthly body. I mean, just imagine here they've known earthly life is all they've known for typically years, decades for most people. Friends, family, loved ones, everyone is down in that earthly life. And yet, among those who have a choice, the great majority do not want to leave that unearthly heavenly realm.
Dr. Jeff Long, you are described as basically one of the most well-known or the most well-known near-death experience researcher. And I want to get, and the winner of the Bigelow Institute for Consciousness Studies for your essay on the scientific evidence for near-death experiences, which is a New York Times bestseller. And what I wanted to talk to you about more importantly is that you live in a world of science. You know, you're not like some guy who, wears beads and has had this experience. You're an oncologist, right?
Right. Yeah. Radiation oncology, use of radiation to treat cancer. I'm a full-time practicing physician.
Wow. So you deal with, it's a heavy job. You deal with, you see it work, you see it not work. You've got to tell people that they have probably not as much time as they thought they did. It's got to be a tough one. And so your experience with life and death is very different than most of ours.
Oh, you're absolutely right. I mean, that's a part of my practice. Unfortunately, we have to give bad news regularly. And, these are people that have friends, family, loved ones. And if their cancer can't be cured, I mean, that you can imagine what shocking news that is. So that's a part of my everyday practice. On the other hand, often we bring very good news. Your cancer is cured. That's great. We expect great things, but it's a little bit of a roller coaster, professional practice in terms of the news, and sometimes very good, sometimes very devastating news I share with my patients.
What does it do to you as a physician? Do you find yourself sometimes kind of, like I love this. I think Socrates said a philosopher should have a quiet contempt for their body. The idea that this is just machinery. It's just, I live within this kind of rusty, kind of awkward puppet meat suit, and it's going to go anyway. Do you find yourself being more cautious health-wise, or are you less cautious?
I'm probably a little more cautious health-wise. As a radiation oncology physician, obviously I don't smoke, take good care of myself, get regular medical care. So, pay attention to any of the symptoms. I've been practicing for 38 years, so that's long enough that you kind of get into a routine of, not being overly concerned and yet being appropriately concerned and cautious, and getting those screening medical studies that everybody should, that's age specific.
Do you subscribe to any particular diet, or do you believe that this is genetic, it's environmental, it's a combination of all of them? Obviously, if you smoke, it's probably not a great idea. There are a lot of reasons to not do certain things, right? So,
oh, absolutely. Yeah, there's cancer is a multifactorial process. It can be related to the environment. Smoking is certainly the number one cancer cause and cancer killer as a result. Certainly the number one risk factor is being up in years. The older you are, the more likely you are to get cancer. So there's a genetic factor certainly have a lot to play in terms of an individual's risk. And interestingly, with new treatments that are designed to target genetic abnormalities of cancer, we're now targeting that with what we call immunotherapy. We're actually curing more people now than we ever could before with cancer.
I love it. So let's get into this. Let's get into near-death experience. You hear that and all of a sudden we're like, oh boy, here we go with the woo-woo stuff, right? But before we get into near-death experience, what I'm interested in is when does someone actually die? There's this moment, right? There's a moment. There's got to be a moment, which is, your heart can stop, you can have brain death, but your body's still going, right? There is a moment where you take your last breath, and in fact, my father-in-law, he died. I'm sorry, not my father-in-law. My brother-in-law's father passed, and it was when he took his last breath, there was a change you knew that he was no longer with us. You could see it physically. I wasn't there, but it was how it was, and I've heard other people describe this, where even the coloring of the body changes and everything changes, right? So it's like something leaves your body,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Many people have that sense. You have that last breath, you lose consciousness, and you're physiologically progressing to that irreversible permanent death. Many people seem to have that sense that it's different. It's almost like there was some life, however, on the edge, and then all of a sudden there's no life. And so, I've kind of wondered if that isn't an awareness, at least at some level, some sensory level of the people around them, that their, if you will, soul, that part of the immaterial part of the body, has left right at that moment of physical death.
Yeah, if you look at Buddhists and these Himalayan sages, that they'll talk a lot of times about how you can kind of be a witness to not only your mind and your emotions, but also your own body. They call it sakti. I think they call it cultivating the witness. So, when you watch this Buddhist monk in 1963, when he was protesting the South Vietnamese government's treatment of Buddhists, he lit himself on fire. And David Halberstam of the New York Times and his colleagues said he didn't move. I mean, he just burned and then keeled over, and they heard the air leave his lungs. But whatever was going on with that high level Buddhist monk, he was dealing on a plane that most of us don't, and he was, it seems, probably either watching that happen or he had already detached from his body, right? And so that's a near death. That feels like what you kind of describe a lot of times. Is that the area?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, there was a big organization that does surveys of people called Pew Forum, and a 2021 survey found that 72% of Americans believed that near-death experience was an observation of the essence leaving the physical body at the time of death. You can interpret that essence as soul. So not only do I believe that happens, but so does the majority of people in the United States, that there really is that immaterial part of each and every one of us, the soul, and it really does leave and go on existing after seeing the apparent physical permanent death.
So why did you come to that conclusion? There's the near death experience. What is NDERF.org? Can you tell us about that? Because
Sure.
you've got the New York Times bestseller, Evidence of the Afterlife, and then God in the Afterlife, the groundbreaking new evidence for God and near death experience. I mean, you wrote these things. This is something you're really, really interested in. But as an oncologist, what happened? Like, what caused you to kind of even go down this thing? I mean, this is all anecdotal, but there's got to be through lines, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I've studied well over 4,000 near-death experiences, so it's
Damn.
no longer anecdotal. This is a mammoth series, but I actually got interested in that decades ago when I was in my residency training to be a physician, radiation oncology physician. This was so long ago, it was before the internet. So to read about cancer, we'd go down to the medical library and go through these huge bound medical journals that were in paper form. And so I was going through the Journal of the American Medical Association, flipping through looking for a cancer-related article. And completely by accident, there was a title of the article that had the phrase near-death experience in it. So I paused. I'd never heard about that. I mean, everything I learned medically was you're either alive or you're dead. And what's this near-death experience thing? So puzzled, I read the entire article and was immediately fascinated. I mean, how can you not be fascinated by the concept of what happens after we die? And yet here was a cardiologist who'd had several dozen patients that had near-death experiences, that had that consciousness separate from the body when their heart stopped beating, bringing back observations, very accurate observations of what was going on while they were being resuscitated, while they were literally in a coma. So immediately I was fascinated. I remember somewhat prophetically thinking, well, why aren't more people researching this incredible phenomena? And so that led to my thinking about doing this. And then several years later, when I heard my first person share a near-death experience in person, I immediately said, if this is true, if this is real, this changes my view of the universe. So over 25 years ago, I started the website nderf.org, the Near Death Experience Research Foundation. But I started that because I was curious, or if you will, I was appropriately a skeptic at that time. I'm a man of science, I'm a man of evidence. And so I knew I wanted to go to the best source of evidence, that being people who had these experiences, tell me about them in the form I had on the website and the multiple survey questions. And once I started that process over 25 years ago, very quickly I realized near-death experiences are, in a word, real.
What do you mean? So typically what I would do, I guess, in that situation is try to see if there was a through line. Are there
Mhm.
similarities in how people describe it?
Oh, absolutely. Both for me and for the many other people studying near-death experiences, we see a very consistent pattern of elements or what occurs during a near-death experience. Now, while no two near-death experiences are the same, if you study a large number, you will see this very common pattern. There's that life-threatening event, boom, they're unconscious or clinically dead with no heartbeat. So at that time, they shouldn't have any conscious experience at all. They do. And that's the experience part of a near-death experience. What's often described
So
is
wait, so
conscious.
when they're, everything stops, they seem to still know and be able to see what's going on.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, that's a very common initial thing that happens during a near-death experiences is that so-called out-of-body experience. Consciousness separates from the physical body while their physical body is unconscious or clinically dead. They shouldn't have any ability to bring back any memory, any conscious sensorium awareness at all. And yet they do. By the thousands they've shared with me, what they can see with their consciousness as it rises typically above that body, their physical body down below, what they see and hear when they check it out later with people that were on the scene or what they saw and heard in the environment, almost invariably 100% accurate down to the finest details.
Wow.
So a
So
very
the heart stops. The brain's still working, but the heart stops. They can still ostensibly see and hear, I would imagine.
mhm.
But
Well,
you,
but the brain isn't working. That's the whole
so
point
the
of this.
brain's
I mean,
not working.
when they okay, look at it this way: a very common precipitating event of a near-death experience is a heart attack, cardiac arrest. That means your heart stops beating. Well, immediately when your heart stops beating, blood stops flowing from the heart to the brain. 10 to 20 seconds after your heart stops beating, the EEG or electroencephalogram measuring brain electrical activity goes absolutely flat. There's
Wow.
no measurable brain electrical cortical activity.
Damn.
And yet, that is a time by the hundreds people have shared having these near death experiences, consciousness apart from the body, very clear, often, most often, super normal awareness and alertness of ongoing earthly events at a time their body is beyond unconscious in a coma.
So they can
And
see
so
their
that,
body, even though their eyes are closed and there's no brain activity. They're looking
oh
down and
yeah,
they can recall what happened as everybody's like, yeah, we're freaking out and trying to get them back to life.
it absolutely. It's very common for them to report the frantic efforts of other people, the emergency medical team coming in, trying to resuscitate them. I mean, they can see and describe vividly efforts at their own resuscitation. They describe those defibrillators being placed on their body because they don't have a measurable heartbeat. Boom, the chest moves up with the electrical defibrillator causes muscle contraction. They describe that exactly. Boom, boom. They may need to be defibrillated multiple times. They've been bagged by that time, often intubated. Someone squeezing a bag trying to get some oxygen in them. Oh, these are people absolutely on the threshold of life and death that have that heart stoppage and have that resuscitation. And yet here is their consciousness over their body during a near-death experience, vividly aware down to the finest detail of what's going on to their body down below.
Can you give me some examples of things that people saw and heard that they should not have seen and heard where, they come back? I mean, that's the thing. So sometimes maybe when you're coming to, you're seeing all this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
how long are people out for typically in these situations?
Right. Well, you're unconscious or clinically dead, typically in the order of magnitude of minutes. And if you start to get much longer than that, other than exceptional situations like cold water drowning, you're not going to come back. You're not going to be able to be resuscitated. So that's the amazing thing about near-death experiences is that even though they're unconscious or clinically dead minutes, they could have a very detailed amount of information of experience during their NDEs that would have translated into far more than just a few minutes, even over an hour in terms of relative earthly time.
Damn. It's so wild. So I didn't know that the electricity in the body had stopped. That's significant, you know? No brain activity, no heart activity. And meanwhile, they pull up, they're able to see everything. It makes sense though. You have examples of this with the Buddhists that practice this stuff. They can go through, you know, the in the Himalayas in India, you'll find the Indian Army will come across these yogis who will be in 50 below or 30 below in just a robe, and they're covered in snow, and they're literally meditating and not moving and practicing this detachment, you know. And then of course I'm sure they get warmed up and all that, but they can be out there for way longer than a human being should be. So,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, that's awesome. I mean, what the power of the human mind and the brain and is it's far more than
or not
you
just
might
the
think.
human brain and mind. Maybe it's something beyond the human brain and mind. Maybe it's the ability to watch them. We know that you can watch the mind, right? Like you can actually observe your thoughts. You can see the thoughts come into your brain like an empty room. I mean, that would be the idea of kind of like with meditation, from what I understand. It's like trying to have no thoughts but be pure awareness, whatever that means. I'm not, you know, but I am fascinated with that. And maybe that's the area that we're talking about. I don't know, but it does seem that Christianity talks about a soul. The Buddhists talk about a soul of some kind. I mean, even the Greeks, even the philosophers like Aristotle and certainly Plato and Socrates talked about it.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah, it's really, that's what's so exciting about studying near-death experience. I mean, we're literally, even after it's been known for decades, it's still, I feel like we're at the frontier still. There's so much new and exciting things to be learned. In fact, I would say even after I've studied it for 25 years, what we don't know about near-death experiences exceeds what we do know. And so it's a wide open area. It's exciting. There's a lot of fascinating things going on. And, you know, over and over to have all these people from every walk of life, from all around the world, young, old, regardless of their prior belief system, all describing near-death experiences that are remarkably similar, have remarkably consistently observed not only content as to what occurs, but also typically occurring in a consistent order. So it remains fascinating to me even after all these years.
What is that order? Explain that.
Sure. Well, again, while no two near-death experiences are the same or have even, you know, all the characteristics, a common thing that occurs during a near-death experience is boom, that physical accident or injury, their physical body's down, they're unconscious or clinically dead with no heartbeat. Then at that time, as we talked about, a common initial event is that so-called out-of-body experience, consciousness rising above their body where they can see and hear ongoing earthly events, vividly accurate. Following that, they may travel into or through a tunnel, variably described, but really never claustrophobic. Often at the end of that tunnel, there's a beautiful, they call it a mystical, unearthly light. Some people have said, well, it's like 1,000 times intense as the sun, but it doesn't hurt their eyes. Remember, they don't have eyes at this time. They are a non-physical conscious entity. They may then pass into an unworldly realm, often called a heavenly realm, and that's probably an apt description. In that realm, there can be things analogous to Earth in terms of like landscapes, buildings. That's where they may encounter deceased loved ones. These are
So
joyous reunions.
you'll see people actually meet loved ones. They'll
Oh
see
yeah,
them.
about 15% of near-death experiences have that. These are people that they knew and loved in their earthly life, and even if this person died of advanced age or a disfiguring accident or illness, they're essentially always picture perfect health. These are joyous reunions. And also deceased beloved pets are encountered too. Again, same story, picture perfect health. So really a very dramatic part of near-death experiences is they have that interaction. In this beautiful realm, the communication is essentially always non-physical or telepathic. I like to think of it as telepathic on steroids. You're communicating immediately, all thought, context around the thought, emotions, in such a clarity that there's no room at all for any confusion or misunderstanding. They may describe colors in the landscapes, flowers, that is colors that is beautiful beyond anything on earth, literally colors that they've not known on their earthly life that are beautiful beyond anything earthly possible. In this realm, they may also have a life review, and they may become aware of part or even all of their prior life events, which is just, again, sometimes I have to almost pinch myself because here they are unconscious or dead for minutes, and here they are reviewing, for what many people report, their entire prior life, even if they've lived for decades. Around this time, also, don't forget they had that horrifying accident or injury that rendered them physically unconscious. And yet here in this unearthly afterlife realm, they're feeling overwhelming, intense love, overwhelming, intense peace. The fact the two most common words used to describe near-death experiences are light and love. And so they feel this intensely. And interestingly, many near-death experiencers say, while this unearthly, heavenly-like realm may sound very alien or unfamiliar to us, when they're there, they feel a strong sense of familiarity, like they've been there before.
God, that's wild, man. That's, I had I went to a friend of the family's funeral, and the priest said, you know, this transition to something else is always painful. And he likened it to when a baby's born. The baby's been in this beautiful, warm womb, all safe and warm and being fed, and it's quiet, and you can hear the mom's heartbeat. And then it's shot into the world, held upside down, slapped on the ass, or whatever happens, And it's awful. It's cold. It's bright. It's just this, blah, And slowly the child wakes up into this reality that we end up becoming attached to, because there's obviously suffering in life, but also a lot of joy. And then, of course, that ends. And, he was kind of saying, and you're being born into something else, probably better.
Right.
It's kind of a beautiful way to look at it,
Yeah,
It makes
I
sense.
have great news for people that have worried about what happens immediately after their physical bodily death. And it's nothing like being born into the physical world. In fact, I mean, these people, shoot, they may be in agony with that disease or accident that is ultimately going to lead them unconsciousness. I mean, they're often described horrible pain immediately prior to their near-death experience. But boom, the moment that consciousness goes apart from the body, they have essentially never described any pain whatsoever. Boom. They're pain-free and very aware of that, because that's a very sudden and very dramatic transition from them leaving their physical body's accident or illness. And throughout all the near-death experience, virtually never is there any description of unpleasant, painful sensations. I mean, it's essentially always that overwhelming, unearthly even in level of intensity, feeling of peace, love, joy, harmony, connection with that around there. I mean, it's just a very dramatic thing. Unfortunately, at the end of the near-death experience, boom, right back into the physical body. And then, as I've so often heard hundreds and hundreds of times, boom, all of a sudden that pain, that misery immediately returns as they resume consciousness in their physical
Damn.
body.
Have you done follow-ups on what it does to people in terms of their relationship to death? Are they less fearful typically? Because I know somebody, I think it's, God, I can't, he's going to kill me. DeGelder, is it Rob DeGelder? His leg and hand were bitten off by a shark. And he basically died. He died right in the boat when they got him up on the boat. And I said, and he said, dude, there I am getting my leg bit off and my hand bit off I look down and I see this giant black eye. It's my nightmare, right? And he was like, it's not that bad. It's not as bad as I thought it would be. And then he started to try to swim the boat. He dies, basically, loses all his consciousness in the boat. I said, are you afraid of death? And he's like, not even a little bit anymore. Like, I suffered the worst thing that most people's nightmare, and wasn't that bad. Actually, it could be worse. I mean, obviously hell exists on earth, but Paul DeGelder. Sorry, Paul. But he was also an Australian Navy SEAL. He's a badass, but still, it's kind of cool to hear. Now let me ask you this.
Yeah,
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. You asked a great question there. Does having a near-death experience change people? Answer: generally, profoundly. I actually just have an article published in the peer-reviewed journal Explore. It's actually archived by the National Library of Medicine, and boom, there's my name on the article, which is the largest study of what we call near-death experience after effects, which is the typical changes observed in people that have near-death experiences. So in this study, which was the largest study ever published about near-death experience after effects, me and my co-author, we were able to come to some very definite conclusions. We found that people that had near-death experiences were, as your friend, dramatically reduced fear of death. The great majority of people literally have no fear of death. I mean, think about that. Here's people that suffered something that most of us can only imagine, the horror of coming that close to it with a close brush with death. And yet here they are not fearing death after their near-death experience. But in addition to that, obviously they have an increased belief in an afterlife. Why? Well, from their perspective, they know what lies beyond death's door because they personally experienced it. But in addition to that, they find that they have much increased level of compassion. Again, don't forget that very common word that they encounter in near-death experience is love. It's almost like they bring back that little piece of heaven and radiate it through the rest of their earthly life, increasing compassionate caring for their fellow human beings, decreased materialism. Sometimes they'll change jobs if their job can't really allow them to manifest their newfound values of love, compassion, and concern for other people. So, yeah, near-death experiences change people dramatically, and that change is lifelong. Unlike other singles or like flash in the pan events that can occur during life, these after effects or changes actually become more pronounced years to decades after the near-death experience.
Really?
And I will tell you, oh, yeah, absolutely. And you don't change your life that dramatically unless you are convinced that what you experienced deep down and you've had years to decades of life later, it's real, or you don't change your life in response to that event.
That's for sure. You could be speaking about psychedelics. I've heard people describe psychedelics, certain trips, almost the same way. Have you done any studies on psychedelics and how they relate to near death experience?
Yeah, that's a really controversial topic. There's
I
some
know.
real mixed literature on that. As I co-authored several years ago with another researcher, where we did a review of many near-death experiences and identified what occurs during them, and we compared that to reviewing the published literature about what occurs during psychedelic experiences. And it was our conclusion of that article: there's really not a lot of similarity between the two. I mean, there could be some overlap a little bit with some experiences, some near-death experiences, but as a whole, they seem to be two separate groups. Another perspective on this is to go to study first-person descriptions of their psychedelic experience, and you can find literally thousands of those on a website called erowid.org, EROWID. You pick any psychotropic or brain acting drug that you want, and you can read hundreds and hundreds of people describing what they experienced in their own words. And I can tell you, if you could do what I did and compare what's written about psychotropic drugs and the experiences they have, real world, real first person, and compare that to real world first person near death experiences, you don't have to read too many experiences in both categories to realize they're way different.
Oh,
Psychedelics
so they are different. They're very different. Okay.
oh yeah, they're more like psychedelics are more likely to be frightening. They're more likely to be, well, obviously hallucinatory, unreal, as opposed to near-death experiences that are grippingly real. Psychedelics experiences can skip around like dreams, and you almost never see that with near-death experiences. So yes, a few psychedelic experiences can reproduce some significant parts or even substantial parts of a near-death experience, but that's pretty uncommon.
That's interesting. That's an interesting distinction. It's an important one too. What
Mhm.
about dreams? What about
Yeah.
dreams? I mean, what's your theory on that?
I'm glad to answer that. And true confession time, okay?
Yeah.
Don't tell anyone, but this
Oh,
is true. So at the very first time I started that research website, inderf.org, right off the bat, I was curious about that too. I mean, dreams seem to be very unearthly experiences. So the very first survey had a question: was your experience dreamlike in any way? And we had, dozens of near-death experiencers respond to that in a narrative form. And I was embarrassed. Over and over, I kept hearing, "No way, are you kidding? Not a chance. There's nothing like that." And then they were so emphatic. And I felt so embarrassed because of how obvious it was to some people have had dreams, obviously, and they have near-death experiences. As a researcher, that's the most embarrassing question I ever answered. So it's not only just no, it's hell no. They're
Yeah,
nothing
they're
like
nothing alike.
dreams and near-death experiences. And so that was drilled into me so quickly in that survey. That was one of the major reasons I very quickly developed another version of the survey, because I was tired of being embarrassed and frankly offending near-death experiencers when it was so obvious that near-death experiences are nothing like
Well,
dreams.
it sounds like the linchpin there is that near-death experiences, you're totally lucid. You're totally aware of what's going on. You're not dreaming. You're aware you're not dreaming. You're aware you're not having a hallucinatory experience or a psychotic break. You're aware that this is something beautiful. And from what I've read,
Mhm.
a lot of people don't want to leave. They kind of want to stay there. Once they get through that
Yeah,
tunnel, which is so crazy.
it really is. That's you just raised a hugely important point. I mean, especially when people are in having a fairly deep near-death experience, they're in that unearthly or heavenly realm. And as you said earlier, sometimes that strong sense of familiarity. I've been here, I belong here. Here's deceased loved ones, that pain and misery they knew in their earthly life gone. It's they often would they are the great majority of people having a near-death experience don't make a choice about whether to stay in that beautiful unearthly realm or not. They're sent back basically involuntarily to their physical body. But there is a small percentage that have a fascinating discussion, typically with other beings around them, about a choice they have, a choice to stay in that beautiful unearthly realm or return to their earthly body. I mean, just imagine here they've known earthly life is all they've known for typically years, decades for most people. Friends, family, loved ones, everyone is down in that earthly life. And yet, among those who have a choice, the great majority do not want to leave that unearthly heavenly realm. It's so beautiful.
Really?
The sense of peace,
Really?
absolutely, the significant majority.
What brings them
It,
back? Is it a conscious choice?
right. Right. Yeah, there's often, 100% of those people did ultimately come back and tell their story. So it's fascinating to find out what happened. The other beings around them will often dialogue with them. And this is a really awesome interaction they have with these other sort of spiritual beings. They may be shown that we have a small series where they're shown what happens if they decide to stay in that unearthly realm. They're shown a vision of their own funeral to happen a few days later. And that is just grippingly eerie. I recall one, for example, where there was young children involved, and here were 2 or 3 year old children in the front row of the funeral, basically giggling at the future vision of his own funeral because they didn't know what a funeral was.
Mm.
And I went, "Ugh, that's what would happen," and that's certainly very convincing. But when people do make that decision to come back, and I've actually investigated that, most commonly it's for children. If they have children and it's an important connection, and they become aware that it would be a severe impact to their children or other loved ones in their life, spouses, and that's really one of the major reasons they come back, are for those very important, critical family relationships. I'll tell you one reason they don't come back, and that's to make more money, to get more material possessions, to basically manifest the values that most people have on earth. It's really different than that. It's to manifest love, manifest compassion, be there for their family, help others in their family, friends, family, loved ones, navigate the difficulties of life. So they make that literally heroic choice off so often when they
Well,
have a
for
choice, and
someone
then after
else,
they
for love, right?
immediately, yeah, boom, once they make that decision, almost invariably, boom, they're right back down in their physical body, and they sometimes regret that decision. That's not at all unusual. They return to that miserable, even the horror of that accident or injury that nearly killed them.
Damn. And they resent it. I mean, they regret
Yeah.
it. They regret it.
Oh, they,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. That's fascinating. That's fascinating. But it makes sense. There was a pastor who said, "I've been at the bedside of thousands of people who've taken their last breath. Not one of them asked to see their trophies or to see what their bank account said or to hear about their accomplishments. They just wanted to be around the ones they love, you know, that which makes a lot of
That's
sense.
great words of wisdom right there. Yeah.
Yeah, but we forget it.
Yeah.
We always forget it because we have alimony and we have rent and we have mortgage and we have all these things, right? And that's part of
Yeah.
being alive. That's part of being alive is being thrust into the practical day-to-day reality, you know.
Yeah. And that's really true. I mean, here in our earthly life, I mean, what do you think about all day long? I mean, here I'm a doctor, I've got patients, I've got deadlines, I've got this dang paperwork to do. I've
Yeah.
got, stuff, seem like coming out my ears sometime. And yet, certainly, we've got the other things, other life commitments, other things we need to do, friends, family, loved ones. And yet, sometimes you take that moment of silence, you think about that, what's really important in life. And I think just about everyone, if they really think about what they really want to do, what they really want to accomplish in their life. It's just boom, exactly what you heard from that minister with all the people dying. And that is it's those positive moments when you laughed, when you loved, when you shared, when you were compassionate, when you were loving. It seems like we have multiple lines of sort of from of lines of experience and evidence from earthly lives all converging on how important those values are.
Intimacy.
Exactly.
Intimacy and adventure. Those are the two things I think we stay alive for. And when
Yeah.
you go through something terrible, but somebody's by your side, you build a real bond. You can see
Yeah.
that with soldiers who've gone through combat together. You can see that with people who've gone through the same illness, injuries. It's pretty wild. And the whole point is it tends to build a bond. It creates real love,
That,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good point. And so, there's a lot of our, you don't have to have a near-death experience.
Yeah.
There's a lot you can learn from your own earthly lives that can really inform the rest of your life in a very positive way.
How's it changed you?
Oh, enormously. I mean, here I was over 25 years ago, starting out as basically a skeptic because I'm a show it to me kind of person. I make decisions as a physician treating cancer based on evidence, based on reasoning. People's lives depend on it.
Measurable evidence. You've got to
Oh,
measure
yeah, yeah.
efficacy.
So when I start this out, I was basic. I mean, and it seems so fantastic. I mean, there's nothing I knew nothing medically could explain consciousness apart from the body, consistently observed experiences in all age groups, all prior belief systems, and throughout the world. That was just a big bite for me to take. So, but I was intrigued. I mean, I'd read articles on it. I'd talked to a person live. So once I started realizing, as people shared their near-death experiences and the research data set that I had mounted, I became aware relatively quickly, no doubt about it, based on the strongest evidence that, I mean, the evidence for the reality of near-death experience finally surpassed the level of evidence that we use to treat most types of cancer. I mean, this is huge numbers of people, not only from my research, but from others. So after a while, you really accept the fact that based on evidence, near-death experiences are real. And then even then, it still took me literally years to finally have that sink in and change me. It changed me personally. As a physician, I'm much more open, courageous with my patients. I help them battle that life-threatening illness, cancer, with more courage and more than ever aware that even if we don't get that cancer cured, even if they're going to succumb, that's not the end of their overall existence, that they have an afterlife and a wonderful afterlife, just like all of us. So that's
Good.
helped me to
Very,
be a
very
better doctor.
unscientific of you. Very unscientific of you, by the
Yeah,
way.
very
Right?
outside. Yeah, yeah. I
Thank
sure didn't
God.
learn that in medical school or in residency training. That's true.
Yeah.
And that's again, is you're back to that, life experiences can be the greatest teacher, but it's helped me to be far more compassionate, far more aware of patients. I think I work harder than ever. I mean, it can be exhausting sometime, but now more than ever, my patients get the best and we give them the best chance of getting their cancer cured.
What does research mean in this field?
Sure. There's retrospective studies. That's what I do. In other words, we gather stories from people that have had near-death experiences. Often many years ago, they fill out a survey, and then we study that, and then we go ahead and then we well, so we go ahead and study that, and let me back up. So what research to me means exactly in the near-death experience arena that it would be as if I was in doing medical research. You get the evidence, you get the best evidence you can. Retrospective studies, you look at people that have either been treated medically and how they did and what worked. Near-death experience the same way. You look at these narratives, you look at all the survey questions you ask, and you put it all together. So that's research. That's retrospective. There are a few, like only about 6 prospective studies of near-death experience where they studied people that were coding, that say, for example, at the time they had heart stopped in emergency rooms. So it's been very, very few prospective studies, typically with very few patients. We're in desperate need to do more prospective near-death experience studies. I think we could learn so much.
Have you done a cross section though of like, are these people that are coming back and describing this tunnel and this light and their loved ones, are they primarily Christians? Are they Americans? Are they white? What have we done any studies on what happens to, say, a Korean Buddhist when they have a near-death experience, or a Shinto Japanese, or an atheist? Have you done any of that research? Because I always wonder if their religious and faith-based upbringing is actually what's playing a factor here.
That's a great question, and the answer is an emphatic yes. Here's the details. Due to the heroics of my wife, who's an attorney, but is also the webmaster of our nderf.org website, portions of the website, including the survey, has been translated into over 30 different languages. We get accounts from people all over the world, including non-Western countries. So as a result of that, we're able to do by far the largest cross-cultural study of near-death experience that's ever been done. And I've even co-authored several papers with an Iranian near-death experience researcher who studies Muslim near-death experiences there. In our current survey, we ask directly about religious affiliation at the time of their experience, and we have a pretty large population of people that self-describe themselves as atheists, as agnostics. So what is amazing to me and other near-death experience researchers, it doesn't make any difference whether you're, say, a Christian in the United States or a Muslim in Egypt or a Hindu in India, anywhere in the world that you have your near-death experience and whatever your prior religious or cultural beliefs, when you have that near-death experience, it's going to be strikingly similar.
God, that's amazing.
So,
that's a big deal. That's
you
interesting.
You really don't see the prior religious beliefs having a huge effect on the experience that they have. In other words, they're still going to have that consciousness apart from the body, go through the tunnel, be in that beautiful unearthly landscape. They may encounter deceased relatives, have a life review, feel those same emotions. So everywhere on the planet that you are, in near-death experience, I guess you could say, is the ultimate equal opportunity experience, if you want to look at it that way, because it seems to affect people in so how they experience it is so similar. Now, how they change their life after it, that can be significantly influenced by their prior beliefs. In other words, if they have prior particular religious beliefs, they may put a spin on it based on their prior beliefs, and that's understandable.
Yeah, but how often do they describe this tunnel with the light? And is this cross-cultural? This is something you hear from Buddhists, Hindus, Muslims, atheists?
Absolutely.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
About 15, 20 years ago, there was a controversy about whether people in non-Western countries had tunnel experiences. The answer I'm here to tell you, I have probably up to about 80 or 100 non-Western near-death experiences. So yes, they do have tunnels, and it's tunnels just like, other people. And don't forget, language can get in the way of describing a near-death experience. I mean, here's something that people often have difficulty expressing in language because it's so unearthly, it's so unlike any of their other experiences. It's fairly common for near-death experiences to be called ineffable, which means difficult to describe in words. So especially when you're trying to translate something in non-English into English, that's where you get into a little bit of trouble. But what shines through all those different translations and different languages, what people are experiencing, it seems to be remarkably similar. And that was what we established too in my several publications I co-authored with my Iranian Muslim near-death experience researcher.
How far back do near-death experiences go? Have you looked at the historical record?
Sure. The very first near-death experience that was, as best we can tell, described was back in the era of Plato. Back then, there was a soldier named E-R, and he died, they thought he died in battle. And as was the custom at that time, they put them on top of a big wood pile and they light it on fire, and that was their custom back in the Plato's era. So was up on the funeral pyre and they were getting about ready to light it when he suddenly recovered from what they thought was fatal injuries. And went on to describe a very remarkable, unearthly experience that seems analogous to the near-death experiences we have today. So subsequent to that time, there's been near-death experiences recorded in medieval times, from even centuries ago, and including some very well-documented ones from some centuries ago where people kept detailed records. So near-death experiences, when they first became widely popular with Dr. Raymond Moody's popular book, Life After Life in 1975, near-death experiences have been around for centuries, for millennia. We just didn't recognize them or know what they were.
There are though, like so when you get rushed with endorphins,
Mhm.
I mean an overwhelming amount of endorphins, pain goes away,
Mhm.
and like people are being attacked by animals, for example. They just go into this thing where they, wow, this is happening to me right now, and they feel no pain.
Mhm.
Um, could it be that this is just a release of all the endorphins in your body?
Sure. Now, I've studied carefully the possible alternative explanations of near-death experiences, and you raise a really intriguing possibility. Endorphins are, if you will, the brain's natural painkiller. They're narcotic-like substances that are naturally occurred in the brain, and they specifically can reduce pain. I mean, it's probably a survival advantage for people that we have endorphins in the brain, the ability to produce that to just exactly, like you said there, reduce pain when we're faced with a life-threatening event. However, when people have that endorphin release in their brain in response to some severe stress, like narcotics, like other types of related chemicals to endorphins, once you finish that life-threatening event, you still have that pain relief that can go on literally for an hour or more.
Mm.
That's not true with near-death experiences at all. At the end of the experience, well, first of all, as we said, during the experience, during their NDE, they don't feel any pain. They're
Right.
they're incredibly pain free. But boom, the moment they go back into their physical body, the moment they come into consciousness, they are fully in pain and generally profoundly so. So there's
Right.
no
That
hint
makes
of
sense.
that. Yeah, no hint of that long-lasting endorphin effect in near-death experiences whatsoever.
There are people that go through terrible things. I know of a father who came into the room after his son committed suicide. Terrible, terrible, I thought. And he was watching himself. He pulled up from his body and he could see himself responding in this situation. So there are people who go through terrible things, and suddenly they pull back from their body, and even though they're not dead, they're watching themselves. So have you looked at that?
Yes, by the many, many hundreds.
See, I love
Um,
how you have an answer for all. I'm trying to steel man this. It's great, man. You're
I tell you what, yeah, I mean, I've been so fascinated with this. I set up an entire another website, oberf.org stands for the Out of Body Experience Research Foundation. So we've received several thousand other types of experiences. I mean, exactly like what you described there. If consciousness goes apart from the body at a time when they're not physically compromised or having a close brush with death, then that's, a spontaneous out of body experience. And these are fascinating experiences. Once again, you have consciousness apart from the body. They can see and hear ongoing earthly events that just about all the time they validate down to the finest details when they return to their physical body and check it out. And yes, out of body experiences can be induced by severe psychological stress. They can occur spontaneously with seeming no precipitating event at all. And they're fascinating experiences because, again, what occurs during them, while there's, as a group, they're generally different from near-death experiences, there can be that overlap and that very remarkable occasional out-of-body experience, which is a very deep and profound, spiritually transformative experience. So we see lots and lots of that.
God, it's amazing. Yeah, it does sound like near death experiences are a thing of their own. They seem to stand apart from all the explanations that go on with people when they're living in this realm. I mean, is that a fair
Mhm.
statement?
Oh, absolutely true. I mean, think about the evidence for near-death experience. Consciousness apart from the body and what they see and hear is accurate, even if what they're seeing and hearing is geographically far from their physical body. And I mean, like city blocks away.
Wait a minute. Wait a
We've
minute.
had people
Yeah, I've
totally
heard this.
blind, including,
Hold
yeah,
on.
you've probably heard of it.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Let's back up. This is important. So say that again.
Okay.
Say that again. They've been dead.
Uh,
They pull back from their body and they have experiences. What? Like they know what's going on blocks away.
Oh, yeah. That's unusual, but we have scores of people that have that out of body experience. It's not just over their physical body. Occasionally, their consciousness leaves the geographic area of their physical body, and they can observe things blocks even over a mile away. For example, we had a non-Western near-death experience where the guy went into cardiac arrest. His heart stopped right out on a city street. Consciousness over his body. He saw people trying to bring him back to life, but then his consciousness drifted blocks away and he was looking through a window and saw his wife looking at housing in a different city. And that didn't make any sense on the internet. It didn't make any sense. He said, well, what's this? We've never talked about that. We live here. I mean, what's going on? It was only after he got over that close brush with death and talked with his wife. Yes, exactly at that time, he was physically down on the street dying. She was looking over some housing in a different city because that day she'd had a job offer in that city and she was just curious what the housing would be like. Husband who died had no idea about that. It was only after he observed that consciousness apart from the body during his near-death experience he became aware. Once again, validated that physical or that awareness, that visual awareness, far beyond any possible physical sensory awareness of his body, details checked out to the finest detail.
You know, William Blatty, I think, who wrote The Exorcist, he was a journalist.
Oh.
And I don't know if this, you have to be careful with all these anecdotal stories, but what kind of fascinated him was that this kid in Egypt who was possessed or, had this psychotic break, ended up speaking, I think, Aramaic or something, and was speaking languages that he had not been exposed to. And that kind of sent him. And, Jung, when he studied psychotic breaks, found that the breaks were very similar cross-culturally. They saw things, they hallucinated, they had revelations that were very, very similar, regardless of whether they had. So the Yanomamo in Brazil were very similar to someone in Sweden, and this was in the 1800s when they had obviously no connection. So studying these sort of psychic structures that seem to cross over, there is this human connection, that there are these broad similarities, especially when we do break from what we would consider everyday reality.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of fascinating too. I don't know if you've looked into any of that.
Oh, as a doctor, I studied psychiatric illnesses. That was a long time ago in medical school. But yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's absolutely fascinating when, people have that other sort of direction of brain function, that being psychosis, that being entering observations, auditory, hearing things that are unreal, how similar that can all be. That all points to a similar area of the brain that's having a dysfunction at the time of a psychotic break.
How have you been received by the scientific community? I'm sure you suffer no shortage of skeptics, or are they sort of bemusedly tolerant of the idea that there probably is something out there?
Yeah,
there's a there.
Yeah, that's a great question. I've never lost a debate with skeptics, by the way. I mean, you can tell already from what we've shared so far, the evidence for the reality of near-death experience is so strong. And in fact, when you start being a skeptic and saying, well, there must be something in the physical brain that explains this, I'm here to tell you there's been over 30 different skeptical explanations in near-death experience, because the reason there is so many is that no one or several of these skeptical explanations make any sense at all, even to the skeptics as a group. So they keep coming up with more and more explanations. None of the skeptical explanations explain anything that we're talking about here today. But getting back to how I've been received, once I published some very important peer review literature, I've co-authored scholarly book chapters. So as a result of that, I've been quite respected in the academic community that's interested in near-death experience. Certainly writing a New York Times best-selling book helps too. So I've been very impressed overall. My colleagues, including those in medicine, are fascinated with this. I've talked at medical grand rounds. I've talked to groups of doctors, and as part of getting continued medical education credits, they have to fill out a survey. So I've actually seen some very objective assessment by my peers, by other doctors, and I am amazed at how open they are, how interested they are. I think doctors, especially when they hear about near-death experiences, it's vividly obvious to them, those doctors that have attended people that coded, whose heart stops, where they had to do CPR, where they had to try to bring them back to life and they all didn't make it. They know darn good and well that the evidence from near-death experience absolutely is not explainable by physical brain function, because that's a part of their professional knowledge and experience.
Yeah, they're in the trenches and they've seen it.
Yep.
What's the name of your New York Times bestseller again?
Yeah, Evidence of the Afterlife, the Science of Near-Death Experiences.
And you cover all this stuff. You look at all the data. You talk about cross-cultural comparisons and all these things. Do you get into consciousness? What's your take on consciousness? This is a debated subject even among physicists. The collapsing cat. How do you measure consciousness? Well, you can't. You can measure everything else, but when something is experienced, something happens to the electrons. Something happens and something doesn't happen sometimes. That's sort of the collapsing cat theory.
Sure. Yeah. In consciousness, certainly I've thought a lot about that, and I've given a lot of talks about consciousness related to near-death experience. To me, it is very obvious that you can put consciousness into two groups. There's a physical consciousness of brain. You have strokes, you have focal brain dysfunction. It creates very specific neurologic deficits. We know that because that's how the physical brain works. And yet in the other side of the equation is the consciousness of near-death experiences, the non-physical consciousness, the consciousness that clearly, with a mountain of evidence and multiple lines of evidence, is not due to physical brain function. It's absolutely medically inexplicable. So I think you literally have those two sort of camps of consciousness. I encourage all consciousness research, however you want to come at that, but certainly the physical consciousness of the brain doesn't explain the non-physical consciousness of near-death experience and vice versa.
Yeah, I mean, maybe currently science can't explain it, but you're in the process of trying to figure out a way to scientifically explain it someday, right? I mean, that's kind of the idea.
It's really interesting in my near-death experience work and the obvious, amazing descriptions of consciousness during near-death experiences. Heck, I'm easy. I'm first and foremost a scientist, a researcher. I go down the path of truth wherever that path leads. If someone finds some physical brain function that explains all of near-death experience, well, first of all, I would be astounded. Astonished would be the most astonishing thing in my life because of all the evidence is contrary. But I'd be the first to embrace that. I would say, okay, let's go share that with the world, because I'm not here to advocate a particular agenda or belief system. I'm here to bring the best evidence about consciousness, particularly consciousness during near-death experiences, to the world. That's really what I want to do.
My buddy Amir, who's a religious guy, said something really cool. He said, we have 6 senses. An earthworm has 2. They can sense touch and heat or whatever. To them, that's reality. To us, being able to see and hear and taste and feel and touch or whatever, and all our senses, we're 5 senses. I'm sorry. We know that. I mean, we had that. Bats have sonar, but maybe there's another sense. Maybe there are a number of senses. Maybe this is just a parallel universe. Maybe we're living. Who knows? But I am for sure a believer that there are things that exist that you can't measure, and not at least with our instrumentation, not with our visual apparatus, not with our auditory apparatus. So, it's kind of one of the reasons I stay alive. I love it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, what we don't know about this bigger picture of the universe is just waiting for there to be discovered.
Yeah.
I mean, wouldn't that be fascinating to at least get these tantalizing hints, that lines of evidence about that greater picture, the multiverse, that additional senses that lay latent in, for all of us in our human human brains. I mean, it's just, how can one not be fascinated by consciousness and all the possibilities and all the things that we have yet to discover that could profoundly impact humanity if we were to learn more about them.
I'm going to send this podcast to a number of people who are fascinated with this here in Hollywood.
Okay.
So I appreciate you. Stay safe on that highway, Dr. Jeff Long. And
I will.
I hope they catch that. I hope they catch that bastard.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, he's probably crazy, or who knows? It doesn't matter.
He's crazy.
Yep. So nderf.org is the website. The near-death. What is that near-death experience?
Yeah, the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation.
Fund, right?
If you go to,
yep.
Yeah, you got it.
And then that's .org, and then New York Times bestseller, Evidence of the Afterlife, God in the Afterlife, the groundbreaking new evidence for God and near-death experience. That's awesome, man. Well, thanks for coming on, man. We really appreciate it.
Okay, this was an awesome discussion. So I want to thank you for this very insightful and revealing discussion we had. This was fantastic.
I appreciate you. Well, you made it easy. So you are, as you develop more stuff and as you get closer to God, you come on here anytime. I love talking about this stuff.
Oh, I appreciate that. I just love doing this. I mean, I could literally talk your ears off for hours, but that would be good. Let's shoot for being back here, because I think
Please.
It's not only, it's above and beyond just you and I are both fascinated and had an incredibly good discussion, but this is going to be extremely informative and inspirational to a vast number of your viewers. So I think that's, you're back to that sort of charge from near-death experiences, reaching out to the world with compassion, with truth. That's exactly what we just did here today.
I think so. And you're saying there's more to discuss, so we can have a part two. Really?
We have
tease
a lot more.
Tease me with what's for the next podcast. Tease me.
Yeah, I'm still doing my research and still finding some amazing things. So, well, it will be, certainly what we don't know about NDE exceeds what we do know. But by golly, I'm going to spend the rest of my life narrowing that gap down so that we get, the more and more we learn, the more and more amazing it gets, even after all these years I've been studying. Thank you. I'm excited. Dr. Jeffrey Long, we'll talk to you soon. Appreciate you. You bet. Look forward to it. Thanks again. You got it, buddy. See you later.